So today we're going to be talking about why HTML forms still rule the web, and I just realized the main slide has I gave this talk at Netlify Compose last year, so that's why it says /compose. I probably should have switched that to ConFoo, but anyways, I digress. So a bit about me. I'm a developer advocate at a company called Pomerium, which has nothing to do with web development. I switched roles recently. But prior to that, like I said, I worked at Netlify on like the frameworks team, so like supporting deployments for stuff like Astro, Next.js, and all the flavors of the week. And I'm from Montreal, so local here, and I'm Nicky T online everywhere. And these are some of the places you can find me, and I'm not a big fan of spiders. Although the tiny ones I'm kind of okay with now, because I know they're eating bugs, but I don't know if I could handle Australia. So I saw a video of Chris Hemsworth showing snakes, which I don't mind, but there was, I forget what you call those massive spiders in, yeah, huntsmen, yeah. They're gonna hunt me down, so I don't know, sorry Tourism Australia. Cool, this is just, there's feedback forms that I think that were given out, but they also asked to just pop up a QR code if folks wanna take that. I'll post that at the end too, but you can also fill out the forms, like I said. Cool. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to go back in time a bit. Then we're going to kind of dig into some CSS for forms, including some new pseudo classes. We're going to discuss something called the constraint validation API that people may or may not have heard of. And there'll be a short demo because who doesn't like a live demo, and you know, YOLO. And then we're going to wrap things up discussing forms and frameworks. All right, story time. Let's get to it. So like I said, we're going to go back in time a bit. So I'm a little longer in the tooth. So just before university, I was working in restaurants. So like I was a dishwasher, and then eventually like a busboy, and then like a line cook and waiter. And anyways, all that to say is I saved up money, and I bought what at the time was like probably an amazing computer. But it literally cost me 3,600 Canadian, which kind of blows my mind now, but times are different. But even though this machine was probably somewhat top of the line at the time, you couldn't even play MP3s on a CD because it would skip. It just couldn't handle it. So thankfully, I found a girlfriend with a Pentium 1. But anyways, not sure what she's up to these days, but anyways. So I got my computer and I got online. So this is like early 90s, so like think of stuff like CompuServe, AOL, depending on how old you are. It was like kind of like a walled garden back then. So like if you were on AOL, there was things, America Online, there was things you could go to, but there's not the internet like you know it today. And basically we had dial-up. For anybody that used, well, this was on Windows till, I forget up until when. Maybe it's still on Windows, I don't know. I'm on a Mac these days. But you had this dial-up, and anybody that was using the internet back pre-broadband, you know, I remember being up at my parents' cottage checking Gmail, because Gmail is like pretty old, and somebody picked up the phone and it just disconnected my email. And the internet was so slow that basically Gmail switched to HTML mode, which is like a mode they have if it's really not working. I don't know if they have that, but basically it sounds like there's a few people that can relate to somebody picking up the phone when you're on the internet. Yep. So still early days, and I got my first web browser, and this is like, I don't think they do this still nowadays, but you used to get software and CDs in computer magazines. Like Linux used to do this. Like I remember installing GNOME KDE that way. But I'm pretty sure I got a CD for like NCSA Mosaic, which is like, I'm not positive, but I think that's what Netscape was based off of. But anyways, this is where it all started. No tabs. I remember there was at one point, like when a newer version of Netscape came out, and and iframes, frame sets, which are something that people might remember was kind of like pseudo Ajax days where you would have targets to load things. And I remember loading a site with frame sets. I think I tried to load it in NCSA Mosaic, or like I reinstalled my computer and I had an old version of Netscape and it would just crash because it didn't know what frame sets were. But anyways, I digress. So we're speaking about forms today, and I did not style this. This is, if you actually search for GeoCities on Google, it actually gives you the Comic Sans MS font, which is pretty hilarious. I mean, I think anybody who was on the internet in the mid or early 90s was very familiar with Comic Sans MS. So it's still a lovable font, but your designer, if you're doing any kind of web development, will probably not appreciate it. But speaking of GeoCities, hello forms. This is how I first came to know forms. So GeoCities, this is from the Internet Archive. I don't know whose site it is, but some people might remember the Internet Baby, the dancing GIF there was on Ally McBeal too, a TV show that people might have watched. But GeoCities had a few things. You had your counter like in the bottom left there, and this was like, you know, I think cookies and everything. You could just refresh the page and your counter would just keep going up. And I actually remember internet service providers at that time allowed you to have space on their ISP for your own website. And I remember I was with a company in Montreal called Generation.net, and I had a counter and I deployed my site, which was just FTP. And I'm like, the counter is not working. I had to call them to say, can you give change mod read-write access to a file in the CGI bin of my thing. So anyways, that's how far back we're going here. But aside from the counter, you know, we had guest books, and that's how I first came across forms. Also, for anybody that's done PHP, I've done some modern Laravel recently, but this is kind of what old school PHP, well, maybe it still looks like that, I don't know. But you know, this is kind of like something that you would have submitted back in the 90s, and you'll notice some things. There's, Killian just gave a talk about you don't need JavaScript and stuff, and talking about accessible stuff. You'll notice here that there's no labels on the inputs. The label element, as far as I know, didn't exist then. So, you know, even if you wanted it to be accessible, it wasn't, I guess. But anyways, this is something you might have seen. Also, you know, I used to do a lot of ASP.NET. So web forms, I do have to say, there was some drawbacks to ASP.NET because you could only have one form on the page. And if you ever needed more than one, it was kind of complicated. But it was kind of nice that they gave you a form out of the box. So you were kind of set up for success. You could still do damage, but and this is I pulled this code from somewhere. It's not my own code, but I used to write stuff like this. But yeah, it's just taking a little stroll down form lane here. And yeah, so this was also this one was, that's still C#, but there was even ASP before that, which was kind of like PHP. And anyways. So, you know, other server-side frameworks came along, like Rails, Django, etc. But before all that, basically what happened in 2005, something changed the way we do websites. Well, it happened before 2005, but the term got coined in 2005. So in 2005, there was a person named Jesse James Garrett coined the term AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. If you've never seen XML, there's still stuff out there probably using it, but nowadays we use JSON. But anybody who's been doing web dev for a while, they'll probably still say AJAX. I say fetch sometimes, but I usually still say AJAX. But this was a technique where you could get asynchronous calls to update certain parts of the page, which is pretty much what everybody knows nowadays, regardless of framework. But you had code like this. So people used to hate on Internet Explorer, but there's a lot of things that we should be happy they did. They created XML HTTP2. It was an ActiveX kind of going in the weeds here, but it's an ActiveX object. And basically when Mozilla came out, before it was called Firefox, they adopted this as well. But you used to have code like this. So document.all meant Internet Explorer. Later on, it meant Opera too, I think. But anyways, I digress. But this is code you might have seen. And so basically, with the advent of Ajax, we had something all of a sudden that, I don't know who coined the term, but single page application. So you could refresh part of the page. It sounds kind of funny saying it today because this is pretty much what people do all the time now, but basically you could refresh portions of the page without a full page reload. And at the time, this was kind of game changing. And I don't know, I had some fun with, I think this is from DALI, but so Ajax is going to relax at the spa there. And I'm just gonna take a sip of water. Around the same time of the Ajax era, something called jQuery came out, which people have been doing web dev for a while are probably familiar with. It's still pretty prevalent. If you're doing anything with WordPress, there's probably jQuery everywhere still. But they had like some nice syntactic sugar on Ajax in terms of just making it cross-browser, just like they did with a lot of their APIs. So we've eventually moved away, for the most part, from XML to JavaScript object notation, also known as JSON or JSON, however you want to call it, whether it's a person or an object. But yeah, I'm sure there's still a lot of legacy systems using XML. Like I remember doing .NET stuff with SOAP, so there's like a lot of there's a lot of stuff out there still, I'm sure. I also removed SharePoint off my LinkedIn because I kept getting recruiters asking about SharePoint even 10 years later, but I digress. So at this point, you're probably like, okay, Grandpa Nick, thanks for the stroll down memory lane, but let's get you to bed. But stay with me. There's a point to this history lesson. A lot of us in the room are web developers, probably everybody, and we use forms pretty frequently, or you should be if you aren't. But I've noticed a couple of things, and I don't have concrete data on this. It's just more like vibes and observations, but here's what I got. Although Ajax was like a pretty big innovation, I think we started to hold things wrong in terms of web development. And it's not to say everybody, like obviously there's still people that were just doing things properly, making things accessible all the time. But I think what happened is with the advent of single page applications, you could all of a sudden do all these asynchronous requests to get data, and it didn't have to be in a form. It didn't have to, you could literally just fire it off. You could have a div with an on-click like Killian was talking about in his talk. So I think we kind of lost our way in that sense. And that's not to trash talk on single page applications. Like single page applications are relevant and definitely useful, but you have to build them right. People like Tanner Lindsley, if anybody's aware of TanStack, like I got a chance to talk to him at the Netlify Compose last year about TanStack Start, which is his new SPA framework, and I think they're doing things right that way. But basically, I just think a lot of times people weren't using forms and making things accessible, even though, and I've done div soup myself too. I'm not gonna pretend I'm like some holier than thou person that's been doing everything right forever. But these are just things I've noticed. And the other thing too is you get a lot out of the box with forms, and like forms have changed quite a bit, but they've still stayed the same to some degree too. There's like, I'm just referencing Killian's stuff because he was just talking about it, but there's all kinds of stuff with new CSS selectors, like there's, for focus states, and like there's newer outline stuff, like you're saying. So like there's a lot of things you can do and that you get for free out of the box if you leverage a form. And so I kind of want to talk about some of that stuff too. There's also something called the constraint validation API. So if anybody's ever added a required on an input and just by default, it works, you try to submit it, you see this ugly red text, and your designer is probably just kill me now. But something that people might not realize is you can actually modify that. There's like I used to use a form validation library called Parsley like a long time ago. There's other form validation libraries now, but you can actually still leverage the existing one and manipulate it, including the styling. So we're going to talk a bit about that too. And I wrote this talk as well because, and this is not me being grandpa, but there's a whole generation of developers that to them web development is React. And I'm not knocking these people, that's not the point of what I'm saying. It's just there's stuff that, like I do a ton of React as well. You can still build stuff with React, but still leverage CSS, web standards, and you can just simplify your stuff a lot. So that's the other reason why I kind of wanted to give this talk. So let's talk about CSS for forms and form elements. CSS in general has really had a lot of improvements. I don't even know what version it is now because I don't think they probably technically version it, but like for the longest time, kind of like HTML5, like I'm still waiting on HTML6, but CSS3 came out, and then I don't know if CSS4 actually exists. I think they just keep shipping stuff and call it whatever version. But there's just been like leaps and bounds of stuff that have changed that just make it a lot easier to leverage and make things look good. I expect like some of the stuff I'm going to show, people will be aware of some of these pseudo classes, but there might be some that you're not. So hopefully you learn at least one thing. We'll see. So these are pseudo classes are typically prefixed with a colon, and so you have focus. So basically, this is a CSS. If you style something there, it gets styled when the element gets focused. You can also have focus within, and this is used for styling an element when it receives focus or any of its descendants. And this is kind of nice too. So like a concrete example of this that I can think of that I've actually implemented before is you ever have a drop zone for an upload file. So as soon as you drag it in, you can have the descendant style even though the other thing is getting focused. So, and obviously you can make it look as good as you want. There's also focus visible, and I'm a fan of Tailwind. I've used it a lot. A lot of these things are available in utility classes in Tailwind, but these are what they actually look like for folks if they're coming from Tailwind land. Yeah, aside from that, let's see. Okay, there's others that are, I think they're kind of self-explanatory, but there's the valid and invalid. So if you're in an input and it's the incorrect state of that input. So like say, we're going to get into it, but you can say like type URL and you type in something that's not a URL. The invalid CSS pseudo class will kick in, and then you can style things accordingly. Those are, I would say, they've been around for quite a while. Again, I don't know the dates of any of these things because they just keep putting out so much stuff. But there's two newer ones that you might not be aware of. So I don't know if you've ever, well, I feel like you've all had this experience, but you go to a web form, you're like, okay, I'm going to go fill this thing out. You get to the form, and all of a sudden it just goes invalid, 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 and you're like, what the, like I haven't even touched anything. So that's what will happen if you use the pseudo classes for invalid. But if you use user invalid, it will actually only do that once you do at least one interaction with that particular element. So, and this, don't think this is available everywhere yet, but the browser support's pretty good. But these are, you can also have fallbacks. You can just go to the regular one. So this is, think of it as progressive enhancement. But these two, I would say, are pretty awesome. I'm not going to literally go through the whole list, but here's a bunch of other ones. And some kind of overlap depending on it, but like read-only, you can have required, which people are familiar with, I'm sure. In range is like, say you have an input and it's, I don't know, max 0 to 10 or something. You can have the in-range style there. And a lot of these things, they'll have defaults. You'll usually see like yellow style, I think. Yeah. And here's just a few more here. The checked, which I'm just going to call it on killing again, but he literally just talked about all this stuff. He was making a bespoke checkbox using the actual checkbox just with styling, and these were one of the things you could do. Placeholder shown. I know there's issues potentially with accessibility and placeholders, but that's there too. There's the empty state. There's like just a ton of them. Like honestly, just go to MDN and just check them all out. Cool. So let's talk about constraint validation for forms. Sorry, I'm running out of gas here. I trained my legs yesterday, so if I tip over, that's why. Okay, so I was talking briefly before about like input type URL. So when HTML5 landed, which I feel like it was like maybe 2010, 2015, I don't remember, but hasn't changed since. People just say HTML5 still. But you got this new type attribute that you could put on, or you got new types for the input element. So like email, URL, number, etc. And so right out of the box, like if it's an input type email, you can literally only type in a valid email. I'll say the potentially obvious, but always validate your stuff on the server too. But in terms of, this is baked into the browser, what I'm showing you here. Okay, so you may have seen these things, and maybe the term might have never been mentioned, but it's called constraint validations, like I was saying. So you have like a pattern attribute. So you could have an input, and I don't know, let's say you're doing data entry, you work in a I don't know, like some factory, and you're adding in items, and all the items have to be like, I don't know, CH dash some number. The pattern is essentially a regular expression, so that's something you can set. The min and max attributes can be for values, and then there's the required attribute, which I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with, and there's a ton more. Now, the things that you might not have seen is there's some JavaScript methods, and this gets back to, this is progressive enhancement, but because sometimes JavaScript isn't available. I think realistically, JavaScript is almost always available. There are obviously assisted devices where it might not be, so that can fall back to just regular form validation. But this is where you can start using stuff to actually enhance that default form validation that I was talking about. So this one here, basically, if you run this, it just checks if the field is valid or not. And I'm going to have a demo later showing all this stuff, but and then you have report validity. So this is, it's the validity of an input-based element. It returns true if it's valid, like I was mentioning before, or false otherwise. But on top of that, if it is invalid, it displays the issue to the user in the browser. So that's when you'll see like, the message about it. And then this is where we start getting into being able to customize things. So like literally set custom validity. If you call this and you pass in any string, whatever element, input-based element that is related to, it's automatically going to be invalid. It doesn't matter what you put. And resetting it to empty doesn't make it, basically as soon as you set something in there, it just becomes automatically invalid. And there's also the validation message, like I was saying. This just returns the validation message of the element, which could be set through the custom validity, or it could be like the out-of-the-box one, like you see, like when a form field is required, it says this field is required, or whatever the default message is. And then there's this one, will validate. It sets a custom error message and marks the field as invalidated. And yeah, and then there's the validity here. And so I just have a snippet here from the browser dev tools. So $0 if you're in the browser dev tools, that's the current element that you'd selected. And then it's checking the validity, and you can see there's some information about it. So custom error, there is none, pattern mismatch, there's a bunch of stuff there. But there's this object you have access to. And again, like I said, we've got a demo that I'll show shortly. And then there's the invalid event, and this is what fires when a submittable element has been checked and doesn't satisfy constraints. Okay, let's go to demo time. I'm going to stop extending my screen here for a second. Mirror, hopefully this goes well. Okay, and then there we go. Okay, so This is a live site. You can go to this. It's also on GitHub. Feel free to pull down the code if you want to submit things to add to it. But if you go to formfun.dev, you end up here. Just show a few nice things. This is an Astro site, and it's using solid.js as well. But just want to give, oh, I'm not connected to the internet, really? That's not good. 1 second. ConFoo, why did you die? Worst case, I got my phone, but okay, I'm back. We're back. We are so back. Okay. All right, so just wanted to show there's some nice stuff, view transitions here. This is stuff you get out of the box with Astro, but it's basically native CSS, but that's just an aside, just looks nice. So we're gonna look at some of those things I was talking about. So here, I'm just doing a time check. Okay, we're good. So here we're just looking at an input. Now, right now you can see that it's automatically invalid. Now let's go switch it. Let's switch to here. And this is using the user dash invalid or valid. Now if we come up here, you see it's not invalid immediately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't know, let's say min length. Min length is supposed to be 3. So I'm interacting with it now, and if I just type 1 letter and I leave, now it's invalid. And that's just by leveraging those pseudo classes which are user dash invalid or valid. There's some other things you can toggle here, like if something is read only, and I say check validity, it's valid. Anything read only, even if the input was incorrect, it just gets removed. It's always considered true. So let's turn that back off. What was I doing? Yeah, okay, let's take off read only. Let's go to editable. Okay, so right now we have the built-in validation. So like if I go to submit, you get the ugly, please, okay, that's what the default message is. But, your designer is like crying right now looking at that. So let's go ahead and I'm going to say, let's not use built-in validation. And now I'm leveraging those pseudo classes I was talking about. And I'm still actually using the native browser validation. But in my case, I'm saying like when it's invalid, I'm going to show this other message, or I'm using the same message actually. I'm just happening to show it on the side here. So basically, there's a lot of toggles here to mess around with. And here I can go, not sure why that opened over there. So I can go check validity now, and it's going to say it's false. And you can see here's the validation message. And if we refresh this again, so let's start off again, and let's just say, let's put the regular user. So let's not make it required. So if I type in something here, it's considered valid. Okay, wait, did I? Oh yeah, that's right, yeah. Thank you, good call. Let's just say 0, I don't know. Okay, so now we've got it's valid. So let's leave that. This is valid, but now I'm gonna change the validation message. And this is the set custom validity message I was talking about. And I'm gonna say, yo dog, no dice. And then all of a sudden it's invalid. So this is, again, this is like progressive enhancement you can do. So like, even if say like JavaScript, I don't know, maybe the page crashes or something, because like I'm sure everybody's encountered JavaScript where one error just kills like everything. You're still using the native browser form validation. It just doesn't kick in with your custom stuff, but it'll fall back to the default. So there's just many reasons why I think it's a good idea to just leverage a form for those things. And there's all kinds of other things, and we'll get to this when we talk about frameworks, but even without frameworks, you don't have to have an on-click on a button like a lot of people have probably done in React at some point to submit something. You can do an on-submit, and then you can check there. You also have access, if you have things in a form and you have names, attributes on things, you have access to all that in like the form data API. There's also like a form.elements. There's many ways to get all that information, and you don't need to use a framework to, like there's something in React called controlled components, and then you keep the state of all those things. But you're kind of doing extra work because the form APIs actually hold all this information. So there are valid use cases to use a controlled component sometimes, but again, I would say lean in on, browser defaults, which is like the form data API. All right, cool. And there's a few other inputs here you can try, but that's essentially the demo. Let's switch back here. Let's see if I can do this so that I actually stop mirroring. All right, wow. Impressive, it worked. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, so you just saw that. So let's talk about forms and frameworks. And having worked on the frameworks team at Netlify and working with a lot of the frameworks are on open source, I got a chance to work with people that work on those frameworks, and some of them were my coworkers, like Ryan Carniato, who created Solid.js. I used to work with him at Netlify. He's over at Sentry now. Got a chance to work with the Remix people. So the thing I noticed is all these meta frameworks, they seem to be putting a lot more love into forms nowadays. You saw this, we work closely with Dino at Netlify because that's what runs the edge functions, and they have a Fresh framework, which is a meta framework from them. It's not React, it's Preact, but essentially they went in on all web standards. So when you post something, you can access the form data on the back end as well. So a lot of forms are happening in basically all the frameworks now. Remix has a form component, Next.js, Redwood.js, which is another meta framework if you haven't heard of that one. Nux has a form component. And React 19, for any of the React devs, there's a bunch of new hooks in there. There's use action state, there's use optimistic, there's other form hooks where the form data APIs I was talking about, they're wrapped into some of these hooks. And yeah, just in general, they're all using server actions to some degree, which is just a nice way to basically do a form post, but kind of make it look like you're doing it from the client side, hitting a server function. But and the other thing is all the frameworks, they're kind of, I don't know, for people that did PHP, you used to be able to just form post right back to the same page, and then you would just return something or redirect. And a lot of the frameworks are kind of going with that now. You'll see this in Remix or Fresh. Next.js not so much because they wrap stuff in, they kind of abstract away the requests and stuff, and they have a caching mechanism in there. But basically, I feel like there's a renaissance of kind of not going backwards, but hey, those things are there and they were actually good, and we're starting to use them again. And I think it's a good thing that the frameworks are doing this because people are leveraging the frameworks, so they're going to get all these things and hopefully set them up for success in that respect. That's pretty much it. I feel like I'm going to tip over now, but here's some resources to check out. What else? Oh yeah, there's the dancing baby if you want to check that out. This talk, I was at RemixConf 2023, and there's this amazing talk from John Jensen. He works at Netflix. He essentially made an interactive piano with Remix, and he showed it working, and it's all using JavaScript. And then he went, it's called Abuse the Platform, because essentially he used something called server sent events on the back end, and he was able to render the notes and stuff, so without JavaScript, it's bananas. Honestly, it's really worth watching. Here's a slide deck if folks want to take a peek at that. It'll be up on the ConFoo site, but I'll just let people take a picture of that. Cool. All right, just let a few people go there. Yep, thanks. Cool. And there's the feedback form if anybody wants to fill that out. There's also, I think they were passed around when we started there. And that's pretty much it. If you want to stay in touch, I'm Nicky T online everywhere. And all my socials, website and stuff, it's all available at nickyt.online. And hopefully you learned at least one thing. So thanks, everybody.